Hello, everybody. Welcome to our weekly show about politics. This is Daily Kos GOTV with me, Marcos Molitzis, and today we have a guest co-host, Kara Zelaya. She is filling in for Carrie Alavelt, who is on a much-deserved vacation today. So welcome,
Yes.
Kara. Thank you for hosting with us. We have a great show today. Joining us, we have Aisha Yaqoob Mahmoud. She is the director of the Asian American Advocacy Fund in Georgia. She was part of the team that turned out record number of Asian Americans. Asians, Carolyn, if you know this, for Asians were the largest growing voting demographic.
Wow, that's amazing.
So she did a lot of this work. I'm excited to talk to her about that work she did. And then afterwards, we're going to talk to Daily Kos' Paul Hogarth, who is in charge of our GOTV efforts. And he is busy right now because of Georgia.
Yeah.
This is a show about Georgia, so I'm excited to talk about to those two individuals about what they're doing and what we as an audience, me, you, Kara, and everybody watching, what we can all do to help our two Democratic Senate candidates in Georgia win in January, because everything is on the line, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super exciting time right now because normally this is sort of a duller, lame duck period. I mean, it's never a dull day with a Trump White House, but with also being able to do the Georgia runoffs, we get to stay engaged this time. And I just wanted to say to all of our viewers right now, we have 154 people in the room at the moment watching live. Let us know where you're tuning in from, where in the world and what state. We want to see where our viewers are from, and give us a thumbs up if you're excited for the Georgia runoff elections, like I am, right, Marcos?
Oh my God, so excited! I can't even because everything is on the line, and one of the factors that's going to really play into whether we win or lose in January and how close the election is if Trump can get his voters out.
Yeah.
And when I say Trump's voters, I'm not talking Republican voters. I'm not talking rank and file standard conservatives.
Right.
I am talking about Trump voters. And this is something that has sort of emerged. We now have evidence of it happening twice, right? In 2016, the polls were off and everybody thought, oh, well, maybe it's because we didn't weigh by education.
Right.
So all the pollsters, they redid their algorithms, their weights. And in 2018, the numbers actually were pretty accurate. And they were accurate again in 2019. And Democrats won big in both those years, and in 2017 as well. So things seem to be going well. Oh, look, the suburbs are going our way. We're winning big. This is going to be another good year for us. And yeah, Trump is tough, but we're gonna crush it. And once again, this group of people emerged,
right,
and voted. And
what are you calling them? What are you calling them, Marcos?
The hidden deplorables. And
have you contacted Hillary to figure out if that's okay?
To pay some royalties. It is accurate. And actually, as people start digging into this group, right, there's a picture emerging.
Right.
And it is all very theoretical at this point. I just want to be very, very clear that the data is very early, right? But people are starting to find evidence. And it's basically people who are socially isolated. So mostly white. They are isolated because they live in rural areas. Kids have left for cool places like Austin and Atlanta and Chicago and California, New York. It's meth country because corporations have left. People don't have jobs. They have no faith in corporate America because they've literally been screwed by these factories that packed up and moved to Mexico and overseas. They don't believe in government because, again, their life is pretty crappy and they don't see government in any way helping them out.
Right.
So they are disaffected, disgruntled people who are just not even political.
Right.
And they weren't political. They didn't turn out until Trump came. And Trump has that superpower. He can tickle that racist lizard brain, right? And so if you're economically dejected, you don't think corporate America can save you, you don't think government can save you. And Trump shows up and says, I hate those people too, right? Because it's those people. It's the black people in the city who are taking your welfare money, right? Yeah. It's Latinos, it's those Mexicans with their cabs. Remember the cabs? The cabs. They're taking your jobs, right? And the Jewish people, those Jews are manipulating money, George Soros, whatever. It lands because they've got nothing, and they don't really believe in any policy. I mean, remember, Trump didn't even have a policy platform this year.
Right.
They don't believe in They just want the liberals that they think have made their life miserable. They want to drag them down to their level. They want to destroy.
And it's like a club, you know, it's this sort of like group think that they have found in Trumpism. And we saw early wrinkles of that with the Tea Party, with people who really love Sarah Palin and otherwise were not particularly engaged. And now Trump has spurred and really ignited this sort of hidden deplorables who turn out when his name's on the ballot.
Right. So nationwide, about maybe 10 to 14 million new voters came out because they lost some suburban voters. So it's kind of hard to say how many new voters came out. But he got 10 million more votes than he did in 2016, despite killing off 250,000 Americans, which is COVID incompetence and everything else, right?
Yeah.
And in Georgia, 360,000 more votes in 2016 when he won by 5% than he did in 2020. So the question is, this theory of mine is going to get really, it's going to get tested really soon, right? Here in January. Now, of course, we're going to assume that everybody is turning out because I would almost say odds are that they are. But Trump really tried to get his voters to turn out in the 2018 midterms and in 2019 when Democrats picked up governorships in Kentucky and Louisiana. These are states that Trump won by like 30 points. So, and
not to mention just the total flip of Virginia as well in just last year. So it is
starting in 17 and then in 19. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
So he's tried to get these people to turn out. They don't seem to turn out. Now, it's a small sample size, which is why I say we can't assume anything, right? We're talking 4 years.
And Georgia is also just a recently blue state. So we're putting a lot of like different theories into a pretty interesting political state generally, but it will be a cool test to see how it turns out and how turnout. It's also going to be fascinating to see a special election have the amount of turnout that we're all, I think, expecting and anticipating, and to see really if the hidden deplorables are fully dejected from engaging now that Trump is gone. I mean, the other wrinkle I think in this theory is, do they believe that he's done for? Because he continues to spur the narrative that he has maybe won the election and this is going to go to the Supreme Court or whatever, even though
by a landslide.
Yeah, by a landslide. Even though Barr is out here being like, no.
Everybody's out there saying no. And you make the point that they have found community within them, and this is how QAnon, that's QAnon has been recruiting, and the stories are legion of how these individuals are getting torn from their families, and they're sort of, it's an online, probably the first online virtual cult that in at least in American history, and there is that sense of shared grievance. I mean, can you imagine you're out in meth country, there's no jobs, people are leaving because there's really no future, no hope. Your home has no value, and you look at the cities, right? And this is where all the action, all the jobs are in the cities and the suburbs too. And suburbs are sort of being roped into this sort of narrative, right? The jobs, the culture, the excitement, it's all the education opportunities. They're all in cities, but you know how expensive it is to live in these cities, right? You need one of these sort of information era jobs to be able to even afford to live in one of these cities. So it becomes a sort of walled garden, right? Where they're on the outside, they're looking in, and all they see are these elites who are making the money. They look the best, they had the best jobs, the best cars, the best everything. And they're shut out from that.
Right.
They are completely excluded. And this is what's fueling populist movements, I think, worldwide. I mean, Turkey, right? I mean, Istanbul is an incredibly liberal city. The rest of it votes for Erdogan.
Right. I think it's also important to point out, though, that the suburbs, I was just reading an opinion piece on Politico that was like bemoaning how the Democrats aren't catering to the rural vote, which is always fascinating because it excludes the fact that Republicans are doing nothing for rural voters, period. So to even begin there. But also, I read the stat today that 78% of American rural voters are white. And so that feeds into this idea of the rural vote being conservative. Yes, it has to do with it being a rural area, but also demographically, it's just whiter, which is more conservative, statistically speaking.
Yeah, and there was a study that by a conservative outlet actually, polling firm that found that so they're the ones that brought this idea of social isolation as a predictor for Trump support. And those who were socially isolated were 60% Trump supporters.
Wow.
Those who were not were about 48%, 46 to 48% Trump supporters. Now, given how Republican the white vote is, the fact that less than half of the socially connected white voter base supported Trump, was pro-Trump, I thought was kind of fascinating. And just to be clear, not every Republican is socially isolated, right? But those people can be polled. If you are a member of a mega church and you vote Republican because you're anti-abortion,
right?
Okay, but the answer polls. You can poll them, and this is what makes these deplorables hidden.
Right.
It's because they are. Why? I mean, if you don't believe in government, you don't believe in institutions, you don't believe in the media. Why would you answer a pollster? Why would you join a polling panel? Why would you text polling responses? Like all the ways that pollsters reach people, you can't, because these people won't connect. So this will have a lot to say, I think, in the Georgia election here in January. But I think we win, as we saw in just a few weeks ago. If we get our vote out, we win.
Yeah.
And when a vote is as close as it is, so many people are the reason we won. And I say that in all the best ways, right?
Absolutely.
People have been doing great work. And for sure, the Asian American community in Georgia was a factor, was one of those groups that you could say they were the deciding vote. And to talk about that Asian American vote in Georgia, we have Aisha Yaqoob Mahmoud. She is the director of the Asian American Advocacy Fund in Georgia. And I am so excited to talk to you about what your community was able to accomplish in Georgia. Welcome.
Hi.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
So can you, just to start with, can you put in maybe in numbers and words, just how much of an impact Asian Americans in Georgia had in this election?
Yeah, just to shoot off some numbers from you that we got from our data team this week, but over 186,000 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders voted in the general election this past November. Now, that number may not seem that large when you're looking at other communities of color in Georgia, but for our community, that's huge. And that actually represents a nearly 62% increase from our numbers in 2016. A vast majority of those people actually voted early or via absentee ballot. About 85% of those had already voted prior to November 3rd. And then about 15% of them did show up on election day. So our surge in turnout was definitely a long time coming because of the work of our organization and so many of our partners on the ground. But it's definitely not a surprise, and we're very happy to see how our community showed up.
Wow. Aisha, are we seeing also a response to people asking for absentee ballots coming up with the January election?
Yeah, last I heard, about a third of Asian American voters had already requested their absentee ballots. And it's only been a handful of, I think, maybe 2 weeks since the portal was officially open. So we've been text banking, phone banking, talking to people at the doors, and a lot of them are already aware, already got their ballots requested. Actually, some of our counties have already started dropping their ballots. So some people may have already voted. Voting is already underway.
Yeah, you say that it's not that many people, but of course, given that Joe Biden won the state by 12,000 votes, I mean, it is one of the margins of victory. Do you have a sense of what percentage of Asian American Pacific Islander voters in Georgia voted for Joe Biden versus Donald Trump?
We don't have those final numbers yet in any official form, but our internal numbers show us that about 82% of our Asian American voters that turned out were modeled as likely Biden supporters. So we don't have any of those like formal statistics from exit polls to show yet, but just internally looking at who our community is and maybe their voting history in Democratic primaries or such, about 82% of them are modeled as likely Biden supporters, which is actually quite incredible to think about. It's far beyond what any of the polls would have showed us, and quite frankly, it's because polls don't talk to our voters and they don't know how to talk to our voters.
Yeah, I've actually worked at a polling firm for a little bit, and it was just a constant struggle. I'm Latinx, and even just getting pollsters that spoke Spanish was a big struggle in reaching to different communities. And this was in New York City, and beyond that, there was just no other polls. There was like a lot of English, a little Spanish, nothing else. And I wonder if that's been a problem that you've been experiencing in Georgia as well with your community.
Yeah, I mean, we don't just operate in English and one other language. We have to do our work in countless different languages. We start off with at least 6 languages to start with, but then with every other community that we have inroads with, it always adds more. And I think that's the beauty of the work that we do, is we can really adapt really quickly and build out programs depending on the needs that we have in our community.
So you say 60% increase in turnout in 4 years, which is just, I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's just astronomical. Can you talk about what your organization, what the Asian American Advocacy Fund did to make that a possibility?
Yeah, I mean, I want to point out that a large population of our community this year, I don't have those exact numbers in front of me, but we had a large number of new voters and first-time voters. So I think that just goes to show the history of voter registration efforts and voter engagement efforts that have existed in our community through our partners, through our organization, but also just in Georgia. You know, we have a massive immigrant population that has been growing and becoming naturalized, and now, you know, finally eligible to vote after many years. So looking specifically at what our organization did this cycle, we did a little bit of everything. So we started knocking doors as early as January, believe it or not. And I'm glad that we got to knock in January, because come COVID, we did have to take a step back. And so we shifted really heavily into phones. We made over 1 million voter contact attempts over phones and text messages. What? And again, all of that was multilingual. So we had callers available in Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese, Urdu, Bangla, Hindi, Gujarati, pretty much any language that our community needs. We had that availability. And then we did the really important relational organizing work that we know is necessary to continue to turn out voters who, you know, may not be as thrilled with the, you know, the politicization of what's happening in the world, but really care about the really local issues in their community. And so we worked really closely with our relational organizing team to uplift issues that were very local and not necessarily covered in the national politics. So we talked to them about what's happening in their school board races or sheriff or district attorney races. We even did a campaign on local ballot referendum. So we really touched on those issues at home and changed the narrative about, you know, what this election cycle was for them.
I have a question for you. That all sounds so amazing, but I have a question for you from our Facebook. Yeah. Robert asked that Dems outraised Republicans, and it didn't super, like, nationwide. And it didn't super translate, according to him, into some electoral success. But what can be done better, you think, on the ground with the money that's going into Georgia? It sounds like your organization is doing exactly that kind of work, better handling those resources. So what is your suggestion?
I think nationally, we've recognized this trend of not necessarily putting, or I hope people have recognized the trend of not necessarily spending money just through the parties or through the candidates, and really recognizing that grassroots community organizing, especially within communities of color, is where they're going to win these races. And so we have already noticed so much support from partners around the country who are activating their donor networks to support us and to support our other organizations that we work with, because they recognize that Georgia became a battleground because of our communities of color. And it wasn't because of investment in democratic politics. We've never had this type of money, and we were able to win the state of Georgia. And so can you imagine what our communities can accomplish with serious investment and with long-term investment, so that it's not just for January 5th, but it's building towards 22 and making sure that we can put Stacey Abrams in the governor's mansion, hopefully, or working towards actually winning state legislative seats and making sure that we can make some really great changes at the local and state level as well.
Yeah, last week on our show, we had a organizer from Navajo Nation, and it was exactly the same story. It's amazing the kind of work that people who are on the ground can do, as opposed to spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars on TV ads that build nothing and don't change anybody's minds anyway. One of my favorite stats about this election is that Georgia is the only state in which Trump outspent Joe Biden on the air. And didn't matter, right? Biden won, and Biden outspent Trump on almost every other state, and we still lost North Carolina and Florida. That money does not build electoral power, does not even get votes. The kind of work that you're doing, Aisha, does. one of the things you mentioned sort of actually kind of struck me, right? Because you talked about engaging that community based on local issues. And one of my fears in general is that a lot of the organizing that is done in Democratic circles and by allies is sort of, it's around the presidential election, and that gets all the attention. And so now that there's no presidential election, does that create a fallout? But you're talking about, you weren't organizing around Joe Biden, you were or even Kamala Harris, which, you know, who was the first Asian American vice president, or anybody on the ticket. But you were saying that your organizing is really more about local issues. And are you doing that in a way that brands the Democratic Party as the party that can deliver that, or how exactly do you message that specifically?
When we talk about our issues and we talk about candidates that we want our communities to support, it's always about the issues that are most important to them. So it's, you want access to healthcare, let us help elect people that will get you that healthcare access. I will tell you, we had some folks in the field yesterday, and we had a wonderful conversation with a voter who voted for Trump, but we were able to persuade them and convince them to vote for Ossoff and Warnock in January, specifically because of healthcare and specifically because of how bad COVID-19 has gotten in Georgia, and really pulling that local issue into a very national sense. So although healthcare is a very national and federalized issue and will be decided, and the future of healthcare will be determined by the US Senate, we do have local ways to tie in how that impacts our communities here. Now, when we talk though about, what does the Democratic Party mean for our communities? It's not necessarily what can the Democratic Party do for us. It's really about how can we make sure that we get what we need from the Democratic Party, and we continue to force the conversation and the issues that we in our communities need.
That's amazing. And also it'll be really interesting to see what that shift is from Trump to the Senate races that are happening right now in Georgia. And if there will be some sort of difference in maybe people who voted for Trump because of this sort of character that he has built around himself that people really buy into, but into the policies, not so much.
I mean, it also seems that the Republican Party in Georgia is kind of imploding on themselves. There's so much infighting and mistrust and distrust in the electoral process, and they've kind of brought it on themselves, right? There was some local reporting that showed that about 20,000 Republicans who voted in Republican primaries in 2020 did not show up to vote at all in the general election. Wow. So if Trump had turned out those 20,000 voters, he could have potentially won Georgia, right? And so there's already a backlash against the type of rhetoric, the mistrust, and the games that they've been playing. And I think that's already proven true. And so we'll continue to see the infighting against the Secretary of State and against other state leaders, and we'll see where that takes us.
Yeah, no, I'm really, Trump is supposedly going to be going down to Georgia this weekend. He said, right? I don't know if it's been confirmed or not, but I actually really hope he does, because he's not going to talk about Kerry Loeffler and David Perdue, right? It's going to be his errands of grievances. It's going to be a Festivus ceremony, and there's new studies that have come out. We definitely saw this in 2019, but again, that the counties in which Donald Trump actually had rallies and underperformed for him. So, because it's just so toxic, right? I think it has an impact, and it's not a big impact, but if we're talking 10,000 votes separated the presidential candidates, right? I mean, all you need is 1-2%, half a point here, half a point there, and things happen. I'm curious, this voter that you guys flipped yesterday, did he or she say why they had supported Trump in the first place?
I'll have to check back with my team, but I don't think we spent too much time talking to him about that. I think honestly, the conversation was more geared towards, what really was at stake this January. And for a lot of our communities, it is healthcare. It is, supporting working families. It is education and making sure that our families can really thrive in this next generation.
I was actually going to ask regarding the generational effects that we've seen in voter registration in Georgia. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that the age range there's been a particular uptick in younger voters, or has it been just kind of equal across the board with your community?
I know that there's there's like a pretty decent number of people kind of in the middle of that age range that are newly naturalizing and becoming citizens, and then joining the voter base. But yeah, of course, we always have new voters that are being registered, and actually our partner organizations are working very hard to make sure we can capture any new registrants by December 7th, which is the voter registration deadline. But I think the trend has always been that our communities are very young. We do have elders in our community, and they often require more persuasion, like in other communities.
Yeah.
But our activist base, our volunteer base, has always been powered by young people, and by people who really care about their families and really care about the future of their communities, and so are putting in the work to make sure they have multi-generational conversations, multilingual conversations, and making sure that we're doing that while also holding very near to us other communities of color that are being impacted by politics all over. So our organization really got started during the 2018 Abrams campaign, and we launched Asians for Abrams with the mindset of making sure that we weren't just showing up for a candidate because she was the Democratic nominee, but we were showing up for a candidate because she could have made great change possible for all communities of color. And standing up in support of a Black woman really was a monumental moment for Asian American communities, and it sparked so many great conversations and so much great solidarity that we've just continued to build on that moment.
I have chills from that.
No, I love it so much. I try to be very careful when I talk about this sort of incredible change in Georgia, because I mentioned earlier that Trump got out 360,000 new voters after he won Georgia by 5 points in 2016. By all means, he should have won the state, by all indications. And yet, Democrats, allied groups turned out almost 600,000 more Democrats in just 4 years, which is just doesn't even compute, like a 20% increase in turnout. I know Stacey Abrams gets so much credit, and I would almost say she maybe gets all the credit. So I've been trying to be very, very careful to make sure that people realize that there's a lot of organizations that are working. But after having said all that, I am curious how much coordination, how much work the Stacey Abrams organization actually interact with yours and other groups that are doing the kind of work you're doing at the community level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I always appreciate Stacey for everything she's done for us. From my first day working on immigrant rights issues at the Capitol, she's always been an ally and has always really stuck her neck out for us. And she's continued to do that even with all this national attention. I always appreciate her making sure that she's recognizing other organizations and other organizers. But you're right, we do work very closely with other groups, including Stacey's groups. We have some joint phone banking coming up with Fair Fight and Fair Fight Action. We do a lot of really great organizing on the ground directly with New Georgia Project, especially in parts of the metro area like Gwinnett and Fulton and DeKalb, where we have large pockets of not just Black voters, but also Asian American voters and Latinx voters. So I think we work very closely in those particular areas. But as we continue to grow our reach outside of the metro area, I'm sure we'll rely more heavily on their expertise, because they've been doing work across Georgia, across rural Georgia for very many years.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you talked about how turnout in the Asian community rose by 60%, right?
Yep.
Cycle over cycle. How much more room do you think you have to grow? Do you have a sense of that?
Are you asking for January or for beyond?
Not beyond, just in general. I mean, the question really is we all want to see Georgia become sort of the next Virginia, the next Colorado, right? Red state that became purple for a while, and then now it's a safely blue state. And demographically, it seems to be going in that direction. But again, I'm making an assumption. So I guess the question is there room to grow in that Asian vote in a way that could help solidify Democratic gains in the state?
I think there's always room to grow. And I think that it starts at making sure that the voting process is more equitable and more accessible for more people. So that starts at pushing for more legislation that makes not just registering to vote easy, but makes it easier to access absentee voting. I mean, our community has grown to love absentee voting, and I don't think we're ever going to change that, right? You know, the ease of being able to request an absentee ballot and vote from the comfort of your home. I mean, my dad refuses to go to the polling location because it's just so easy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the more that we push for reforms at the state level and especially at the local level, the more change we're going to see. And just this past cycle, we were able to work with a couple of counties, especially DeKalb, to start providing language access materials in Spanish and in Korean. And in Georgia, we only have Spanish language access in one county, and we don't have Asian language access in any county. So for DeKalb County to willingly provide language access without being required by any federal voting rights act, to do that was a great step forward in recognizing that there's so much more that our local governments and our local counties can be doing to attract new voters and to attract more voters. So as we continue to not just build our voting base, we're also pushing counties to make voting more accessible. You know, we were able to take voters to the polls and help interpret for them. You know, we do that on a daily basis, but if counties can provide those opportunities and if they can provide materials that are already translated, then that cuts us out as the middleman, and they can just access that process a lot easier. So, you know, as we register more voters and turn out more voters, we're also trying to make the process more equitable and make sure that we're not just expanding the voter base, but we're making the process easier.
Yeah, that's going to have a long-lasting effect too. I was reading a statistic that it takes something like 2 times for people to vote for them to become lifelong voters. And in Georgia, you've got this opportunity to do it in like a month.
Well, I mean,
lock it in.
In some places we had an election today, so
right.
we had some special elections going on today. So many people in our community voted in June for our primaries, voted in August for our runoffs, voted in November, in December, and then again in January. So if that doesn't make people lifelong voters, I don't know what will.
That's a great way of contextualizing it.
Yeah.
So Aisha, we're unfortunately we're running out of time, but I do have one really important critical question I think we need to ask you is what can people do to help you and your organization succeed in your work?
I would say we are loving all of the support that we're getting online. So continue to follow us and continue to stay involved in our work, but also sign up to volunteer. We have so many opportunities to make phone calls and send text messages to voters. You can do that from anywhere you're sitting, from the comfort of your own home. Sign up to make phone calls for us, especially if you have language skills. If you don't have language skills, we'll definitely use your help as well. But I know that there's a lot of interest to come to Georgia right now. So I think we're being very cautious and making sure that folks that are coming are taking proper precautions, and that we're bringing folks to Georgia who have language skills and are willing to really put in the work. So if folks are interested, please get in touch with us. We launched our Asians for Ossoff and Warnock campaign a couple weeks ago. So that's our website to get in touch with us. It's actually asiansforgeorgia.org. It'll take you directly to our campaign site where you can volunteer, also donate and support our work, but it'll be the best place to get in touch with us.
Incredible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so very much. Asiansforgeorgia.org.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, so exciting.
It really is exciting. And I, if nothing else, in the next, I don't know, forever of my political career, if I can start getting people to really understand that spending, getting money to campaign to a certain point is helpful. But you had a Jamie Harrison in South Carolina. He raised $58 million. He was asking for money the weekend before the election. That race was not going to hinge on whether he could get another $1 million the weekend before the election. To me, it was a little ick.
Yeah.
And then you have organizations like last week in Navajo country, and this Asian American Advocacy Fund in Georgia, right, who are operating on shoestring budgets. And if they had a fraction of that money, it's a fraction of that money. Yeah. The kind of work that they could do would be impactful. I mean, here she was telling us about a Trump voter that they just flipped, right? Yeah. Why? Because they're actually on the street talking to them. A TV ad will never do that.
It's going to be a big cultural shift that I hope we take away from this election, from the 2020 and also from 2018 to a degree, because I mean, I have friends constantly asking me, like, what do campaigns do with their money? And now it's getting harder and harder to be like, well, they have to put on events and then mailers and TV ads, because no one wants to. And there is, there's of course the argument of us to a certain extent donating to a campaign. But if you're in this work for the long haul, not just for an individual candidate, it really is about the communities within themselves. And I mean, we see this across all forms of activism, with Black Lives Matter. It's just sort of like, let the communities themselves lead the way on how reform is going to come. And I think we're seeing that in the electoral process as well.
Yeah, I really hope. And I don't want to malign Jamie Harrison because he ran a great campaign in a very tough state. So I just want to be clear that.
Right.
but there's a point where the money was just going to saturate TV ads. And
Right.
he ended up losing by double digits. It's a tough state. Yeah. Now, you spend some of that money on the kind of organizations on the ground that can boost turnout by 60%.
Right.
And again, you may not win in 2 years, you may not win in 4 or 8, but we're building for that future. And I'm actually looking at Mississippi as a state that we can flip. It's 40% Black.
Yeah.
And the reason is that it's not Democratic is one, because you have low performance among Black voters and other communities of color, but also because Mississippi whites vote for Democrats like 88-10, right? I mean, it's if you're white in Mississippi, Alabama, you are almost, unless you live in a city, you are almost guaranteed to be a Republican. But there's these demographic changes.
Yeah.
Right? And, we talk about how these older rural white voters are exiting the electorate. And you have these.
What do we mean by that? You can't just drop it. What do we mean by exiting the electorate?
They're dying. It's the circle of life.
Yes,
right?
It sure is. I'm actually really pleased that you brought up Mississippi, because in another life I did a lot of Southern organizing, specifically regionally. I did a lot of separation of church and state work. And I remember driving through Mississippi. I would work at the college level organizing college students. And I looked at, I can't remember off the tip of my tongue the population of Mississippi, but I was like, wait, this is not a high population state. It would take how many canvassers to literally knock on every single door in the state and just begin that dialogue and that conversation.
Yeah, and get 22% of the white vote. It's a purple state.
Yeah,
that's the demographics we're looking at. So, yeah. I'm actually pleased to have our next guest. He is Paul Hogarth. He is a campaign director at Daily Kos, and his job is working with these on-the-ground organizations to do GOTV. So, Paul, this is a perfect place to introduce you to the audience. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm very proud of the work that we were able to do for the November 3rd general election, and now we are energized to do all we can to mobilize the Daily Kos community and help get out the Democratic vote in Georgia.
Do you have some numbers about what you guys were able to accomplish in November?
Absolutely. So just to be clear, we don't actually run get out the vote operations like campaigns or on the ground organizations do. But what we have is we have the reach of an email list of over 3 million people that we can promote. And we basically tell a lot of these campaigns and organizations, you build it and we will promote it and we will get signups for you. So in the course of up until November 3rd, we got 107,769 people in the Daily Kos community through our email recruitment who signed up for Get Out the Vote volunteer events in some form. Now, just to clarify, that doesn't mean that they necessarily followed up and did that work, which is why one of the things that I try to do is I've been trying to ask some of these campaigns, well, when we get the names back, can you also tell us who showed up? So that no, it's true, because this is probably the most impersonal form of recruitment ever, is through a strange email being sent out to thousands of folks. So that gave us a little bit, and definitely, I mean, one of the things that so what we've been doing is we've done phone banking, we've done text banking, but probably the most popular get out the vote activity that we did was kind of the perfect activity for online introverts, which is Vote Forward. And Vote Forward is a program that was actually started in 2017, where folks will write handwritten, personalized letters to targeted voters in these swing states or swing districts who are very likely to vote Democratic due to demographic reasons. But
I have my Vote Forward letters right here.
But they also don't have the best track record of voting. And that the studies have shown that if you send them a handwritten, personalized letter and you drop it in the mail at the perfect amount of time, you can significantly make the difference of whether or not these people actually come out and vote. Now, of the 107,000 people who signed up, 46,482 of them signed up to participate with Vote Forward. They set up an account on Vote Forward. That doesn't mean they only did Vote Forward. They may have also made phone calls or sent text messages. And the program, so I was involved with Vote Forward 2 years ago. Daily Kos, basically volunteers. 2 years ago, we did about half of the 1 million letters that were sent out to voters. This time, Vote Forward came back to us. They were working with more than just us. They were working with Indivisible. They were working with other groups. And they said, we have this audacious goal of sending 10 million letters to people in October to get them to vote in the November election. Well, not only did we beat the 10 million goal, we got over 17 million letters.
Wow.
And of those 17 million, Daily Kos volunteers themselves were responsible for 2.5 million of those.
Damn.
So you were definitely a very valued and important partner. And I told Kara earlier when she asked me to be on the show today is that the timing is perfect because the way these letters are done is that they have to be dropped in the mail at just the right time. They have a very fleeting impact. If you send them too early, people will get them in the mail and they will forget about it and then they won't vote. But if you send them, and also with the problems with the Postal Service, it helps us to work out. So the deadline, the date that we want people to drop their letters in the mail for the January 5th runoff is this coming Monday, December.
Okay. I could not have been better.
Yeah.
I have to be a huge advocate for Vote Forward. As I said, I have my Georgia letters right here. I signed up to do 50 for Georgia. And it's actually become kind of a joke between my my team and I, because I was at our team meeting last week and I was clearly writing letters while they were talking about things. And my one of my supervisors was like, Kara's there writing her Vote Forward letters. And so it's a great thing to do in a Zoom meeting. I just want to recommend to people. It's easy to do. You just print them out and you write your thing and it's great. So I recommend it highly.
So
and Daily Kos lets you do that in your work time too, right?
One thing that is Vote Forward is a little concerned about running out of addresses to send letters to before Monday. So just because the deadline that the people have to drop their letters in the mail is Monday, don't wait until Saturday or Sunday. You may have already missed the opportunity. Yeah. I'll give you some numbers. As of yesterday, there were a little bit over 600,000 unclaimed voters in Georgia that still needed. As of today, we sent out another email. Other groups are doing. We're at 480,000.
Wow!
So that is kind of running out.
What's a URL or a website that people can visit to claim some Georgia addresses?
So probably the best thing what I would do is I would recommend that you go to www.dailykos.com/GOTV, because that is the big clearinghouse that we use for all of the volunteer activities. And then you can scroll down and you can pick the option, write letters. Vote Forward is votefwd.org, Daily Kos, because we want Daily Kos people. We want Vote Forward to know that it's the Daily Kos volunteers who did it.
But yeah, dailykos.com/GOTV. Yeah. GOTV stands for Get Out the Vote. So if you can read, GOTV might seem random, but it's Get Out the Vote. So dailykos.com/GOTV.
And I've dropped both links in the comments of our of everything. So they should be able to see it right now in the comments.
And if you go to dailykos.com/GOTV, there is a link to volunteer directly for the John Ossoff campaign and the Raphael Warnock campaign and the Democratic Party of Georgia and 2020 victims Joe Biden and Fair Fight and New Georgia Action Project, which are the Stacey Abrams organizations that particularly do outreach towards people of color. So those are, so besides writing letters, there is text banking. The problem we've found with text banking, though, is that it's a lot more popular than phone banking and that we run out of numbers really quickly. So we tell people, go ahead and sign up for a shift and send out the text messages. And then phone banking, all of these organizations pretty much use the same remote phone banking operation that, you log into a website, you make phone calls from the privacy of your home. And I realize phone banking is not for a lot of people.
You're a monster phone banker, aren't you, Paul?
I have to say, though, that even an extrovert like me, it can be a little intimidating. So I have a trick when I do phone banking. This is a rock that a political friend of mine gave me 20 years ago that says hope on it. I don't know if you can see it on the screen. When I'm making phone calls, I'm squeezing that rock. And it gives me, and you know, it's just, it's also the old thing, smile when you dial. If you're actually smiling when you're talking to people, people are less rude to you on the phone than they are on text messages.
That's true.
Wow.
No, they're less like, and just, you know, and again, when I did a lot of phone bank training with the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force back in the day, and the one thing that they always said is that you can never control how people respond to your phone calls, if they're rude to you, if they say mean things to you. But the one thing you can control is how many calls you make. And that was the one way that they would kind of try to hold volunteers and organizers accountable was not so much on, well, how many people said they were going to vote or what that, but how many calls did you make? Because that was within our control.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, I just want to ask a general question of how are you feeling about Georgia from all the, I know you're like organizing, so maybe you don't even have a second to catch your breath to think about it, but are you hopeful? Are you excited? Are you nervous?
I mean, here's the thing. I actually did a lot of work 12 years ago. Jim Martin was our Democratic Senate nominee in Georgia. And actually I'm friends with his son who lives out here in the Bay Area. And it was really depressing to see the drop-off in voter turnout between November and December. So I'm cautiously pessimistic given that general reality. But I'm also very excited because control of the Senate is at stake and because of all the incredible on-the-ground organizing that's been going on for the last 12, 15 years to get out the vote. And I will say, as entertaining as it is to read about those stories of Republicans in disarray and the hidden deplorables and whether they'll come back, we can't control that. Yeah. All of that is beyond our control. So I try not to think about it. If anything, I avoid it because I don't want to get complacent and I don't want to just start laughing and thinking, oh, this is so ridiculous. The only thing I'm obsessed with right now is, can we get the same folks who voted last time to come out and vote again? Yeah. And even in the case of Jon Ossoff, I mean, Jon Ossoff, the reason that race is going into runoff is because a libertarian got 5% of the vote. Yeah. So it's about, and that doesn't mean that Jon Ossoff can't win. He absolutely can. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that he wins. But all we can do is get our folks out to vote again. That means, you know, donate money to groups like the Asian American Foundation. My colleagues, Monique and Arna, have set up a really great Act Blue page. And I was on a call a few weeks ago with some of the African American groups that Fair Fight was kind of coordinating. And that money directly goes to pay these organizers on the ground in their own community to talk to voters in their own community. And that money pays time to pay people who want to do that work.
Best money you can spend.
So that's why, like, every single, like, what I do most of the time is I write a lot of emails and I coordinate much of the team to write emails to recruit people to sign up for these online volunteer phone banking, text banking, vote forward. And then the secondary ask, we always have a secondary ask, which is money. And I made the choice recently to say our secondary money ask in every Get Out the Vote email should be to that Act Blue slate of organizations, because that is the most useful bang for your buck that people can give right now.
Absolutely.
Paul, do you have any phone banking story, like a war story, like anything that really stands out that you might want to talk about? Maybe most people that want to do this, ask them away. But
well, I mean, the thing is that, like, I'll tell you the same story I told you, Marcos, about a few days before the election. I mean, I was calling Pennsylvania, and folks are just like, they have been called, and they are sick. And they're just, and that's why smiling when you're on the phone is so important. Just because they're less likely to be rude to you if you're actually smiling and you sound like you're enjoying yourself. And like I say, squeeze the rock, fake it till you make it. This old white male voter, you know, in Pennsylvania, and he gets the call, and he is just grouchy, and he's just like, shut up, stop calling me. I already voted, and I'm not going to tell you how I voted. And I was like, well, sir, if you already voted, then we're not going to call you again. And then right before he hung up on me, he says, I voted for Biden. Like, great, that's all. And then you just record that in the system. Now, just because the organization I was making calls for won't call you again That doesn't mean that some of these other groups aren't going to call you, but at least now we have that in our records, and it's like, it's fine. All right.
I love that. Well, Paul, that's truly amazing, and I'm really excited to see what turns out in Georgia and what we're able to see, like results from the Daily Kos community, from how many letters we end up sending this time around. I saw a tweet the other day. I was involved in the OSOF campaign in 2017, and someone tweeted, "Wouldn't it be great if the first loss of the Trump era, which was the Ossoff campaign, turns into the last win for Democrats during the Trump era?"
And one thing I should, so if you go to our GOTV page, one of the things that we link to, there's this wonderful website called Mobilize America, which a lot of campaigns use to set up signups to do phone banking, text banking, what have you. And what's great is if Daily Kos promotes it, we automatically get those people's email addresses back. We don't even have to talk to the campaign by doing that. And so I'm curating our Georgia page on Mobilize that is linked from our Daily Kos GOTV page. And I call Mobilize the one-stop shop to get plugged in with whether you want to work for Ossoff or Warnock or Fair Fight or New Georgia Action Project. And what's really inspiring is even in this age of COVID where people can't really necessarily meet together, you have a lot of these virtual groups. Like there's like New Yorkers phone banking for Georgia. Like that's on our Mobilize page, and you can go if you live in the New York area, or I guess East Coast Standard Time, and then there's a lot of Bay Area Indivisible chapters that have their site on Mobilize. And again, just do it through us, and if you do it through our Daily Kos portal, we get the names back.
So dailykos.com/GOTV for Get Out the Vote. Paul, thank you so very much for joining us. I'm so excited. And you make GOTV seem so exciting too. For a lot of people, especially a lot of us internet introverts. Carol, you're not an internet introvert, are you?
No, I'm not. I'm an extrovert.
Yeah, see,
terrible.
For people like me, it's picking up a phone and making phone calls is maybe the scariest thing I could imagine. And the fact that Paul even has to psych himself up, and Paul may be one of the most extroverted people I think I know.
I'm not quite as extroverted as Paul, but yes.
But I love the Vote Forward. I love the postcards. It's incredibly, very, very doable. And it's, if you can't do anything else, donating money helps, particularly if you're donating money to these frontline groups like Stacey Abrams, Fair Fight, or the Asian American Advocacy Fund, groups that we've been talking about.
And I'll be sure to put those pages and to tweet those out today. So for people who want to donate after watching this episode, just check our Twitter feed, and I'll be putting them, and especially as we've talked about these very specific groups that are helping out a lot, it's going to be important. And, here at Daily Kos, you always say that this is not a short-term fight. This is like a lifelong dedication.
And the other thing I love about talking to Paul is sort of he stressed a very key founding tenet of Daily Kos from the beginning, that we weren't going to try to replicate what everybody else was doing, right? We had the luck and the fortune and the blessing of being able to attract this massive audience. Our email list is over 3 million. Millions of people visit the site every day. It was it's using that audience to direct them to the organizations that are doing that great work, and almost a lot of the time seeding these organizations. So with Vote Forward, like Paul said, we were almost, I think half of their entire letter writing total in 2016. Now we're down to quick math, 15-20%, right? That's a good thing, right? We were the first site to ever use ActBlue. Yeah. And I remember when by the site, it was me by myself. There was nobody else back then. It was 2005. And I was, maybe 2004, I was terrified to use them, because I didn't know these guys in Boston, and they talked a good game, but I'm not like the Republicans that are, all into the grift. I mean, they all grift each other, right? I was like, I need to protect my community, my readers from people who might be grifters. So they did a really it took a little bit of time, and finally we used them, and boom, ActBlue now is one of our major advantages as a movement.
And as a movement, us at Daily Kos have been particularly poised at being able to help people because we have been, for the most part, I would say we're a team of introverts who are very good at online organizing. And during a pandemic, it's amazing to be seasoned at online organizing and being able to help people out because we've already had those resources and we've been organizing kind of socially distanced. You know, I'm in Virginia, you're in California, you know, we're all over the country as a staff and as a community, especially. People from our community are everywhere. They're in the cities, they're in rural states, in rural areas. And the fact that they know that they can come to us to help in organizing is, I mean, it's the best part of getting to work here and being a part of this community, I think.
And it matters. Kara, do you want to remind people why it matters what happens in Georgia in January?
So Mitch McConnell has his nasty little paws all over our ability to do anything. And it's time to get rid of him. Honestly, is that it? Did I do the right pitch?
That's it, right? It's get rid of Mitch McConnell.
There's my master's degree in elections and campaigns. And I'm like, I don't know, Mitch McConnell's terrible.
Yeah, you know, right before we came on the air, I read his story. Where was it? Maybe it was Mother Jones, about how the Supreme Court is actually interested in implementing or reimposing this doctrine that basically limits the ability of the executive branch to interpret congressional laws.
Yeah.
So right now, basically, Congress passes a law, and then the executive interprets the law based on the parameters of that law. And there's a lot of leeway in how you interpret the law. It's how you have an EPA under Trump look a lot different than an EPA under Obama or what it will look like under Joe Biden. They're all following the same law. You just interpret it and enforce it differently. Yeah. And there's a lot of leeway. And there's now talk that the Supreme Court is interested in reimposing, because this is like an ancient from back in 1930, reimposing this doctrine that would limit the ability of executive branch to be able to interpret laws. And if they do that, it would cripple the Biden administration overnight. Basically, it would make almost the entire federal government unconstitutional. That's how far-ranging that is. And one of the best ways to combat that is actually to have a Democratic Senate. Right. If the laws need to be tweaked, then you pass those technical fixes to allow the executive branch to keep doing what they need to be doing, in spite of Supreme Court efforts to dismantle that. So that even the ability to do executive orders, even the ability to use agency power to pass policy is at risk with the Supreme Court, with this Republican created environment.
Everything is on the ballot, and every single group matters in Georgia right now, and also just for the long term of it. And I would love to ask our Facebook viewers right now, right before we wrap up, just letting us know, commit. It's been told that if you have a plan, you will do it. So I would love messages saying how they're going to volunteer or help out in Georgia, if it's donating through our Act Blue pages, if it's writing letters. We've got a week for the letter writing stuff. So if you are going to commit, let me know in the comments below. But also, just to continue to reinforce this narrative of we cannot only care about presidential elections, if we are committed to flipping every state long-term into turning Georgia into the next Virginia, into the next Colorado. I mean, could you imagine seeing Stacey Abrams as the governor in a few years? It would make all of our dreams just like, in leading and also empowering these incredible people to the governor's mansion, and then eventually to be, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, presidential candidates. Like, it would be amazing. And that work starts now and it continues always.
Absolutely. So thank you everybody for joining us. Remember to subscribe to Daily Kos on YouTube, Facebook too. What do you do?
Yeah, you can like our page on Facebook, facebook.com/Daily Kos. Hit a thumbs up. That way other people can see the video as well.
So thanks to Paul Hogarth. Thanks to Aisha for joining us and talking about what we can do and the work that's being done in Georgia. Thank you, Walter Einenkel and Kara. Thank you for Walter for producing the show, Kara for stepping in and helping out so that Carrie could have a vacation. And thank you to all of you who are watching and who will watch. for the work that you're doing, not just for what we did in November, but also moving forward in Georgia. It's the whole ballgame. So thank you all so very much. Remember, we are on every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern. Have a great weekend. Wear your mask. Stay safe. Love you all. Good night.
Bye, everyone.